The late afternoon sun, a molten gold disk, bled across the sky, casting long, dancing shadows that stretched like weary fingers across the manicured lawn. A gentle breeze, carrying the faint, sweet scent of honeysuckle and freshly cut grass, rustled the leaves of the ancient oak tree that stood sentinel over my backyard. It was, by all accounts, a perfect Saturday. My two children, 7-year-old Leo and 5-year-old Maya, were engaged in a fierce battle of imagination, their laughter like wind chimes tinkling through the warm air. Leo, armed with a twig he'd christened Excalibur, was valiantly defending their makeshift fort, a chaotic but cherished arrangement of old blankets and lawn chairs. Maya, a pint-sized strategist, was directing operations from behind a miniature plastic watering can, her bright pink Wellington boots a stark contrast to the emerald green grass. I, Amelia, was perched on the edge of my own small slice of paradise, a rather worn but deeply loved wrought iron patio set. A half-finished glass of iced tea, condensation beating like tiny diamonds, sat beside me. The hum of a distant lawnmower was the only disruption to the symphony of nature and children's glee. It was a moment of profound peace, a rare and precious commodity in my life. My ex-husband, Mark, had been awarded primary custody, a decision I still wrestled with, a phantom ache in my chest every time my children left my side. So these weekends, these precious Saturday afternoons, were a sacred trust, a time to soak in their presence, to build memories that would hopefully anchor them through the inevitable storms of life. The only thing marring this idyllic scene was the persistent, almost imperceptible prickle of unease that had been my constant companion for the past 6 months. It had started subtly, a series of anonymous emails complaining about minor infractions, a stray ball in the street, a slightly overgrown hedge. Then came the notes slipped under my door, escalating from polite suggestions to thinly veiled threats. The source, I suspected, was Karen. Karen lived 3 houses down, a woman whose meticulously manicured lawn and perfectly pruned rose bushes seemed to reflect her own tightly controlled existence. Her eyes, when I'd encountered her in passing, a rare occurrence as she seemed to glide through life with an almost spectral detachment, were the color of glacial ice and held a perpetual glint of disapproval. We'd never spoken more than a perfunctory hello, but I'd felt her gaze on me, dissecting my every move, judging my every choice. From the moment I'd moved into the neighborhood. Her complaints, though, had always been channeled through official channels, the HOA, the town council. Until now. The unease solidified into a cold dread as a black SUV, a menacing silhouette against the setting sun, glided silently down our street. It paused, not at a driveway, but directly in front of my house, its tinted windows obscuring the driver. My heart gave a nervous flutter. This was not the usual delivery truck or a neighbor dropping by. This felt deliberate. The driver's side door opened, and Karen emerged. She was, as always, impeccably dressed. A crisp white blouse, tailored black trousers, and sensible gleaming loafers. Not a single hair out of place in her severe, chin-length bob. She looked like a predator, perfectly camouflaged in the suburban landscape, about to pounce. Leo and Maya, their game momentarily forgotten, turned their curious faces towards the stranger. Their innocent wonder was a stark contrast to the knot tightening in my stomach. Karen's gaze swept over my yard, lingering on the picnic table. It was a simple, weathered wooden table, a relic from my childhood, that I'd dragged out from the garage for the kids to use as a base for their fort. It was slightly chipped, the paint faded in places, but it was sturdy and held a multitude of happy memories. Today, it was draped with Maya's favorite blanket, a bright pink monstrosity adorned with cartoon unicorns. Karen's lips, painted a severe shade of crimson, thinned, She began to walk towards me, her stride purposeful, her arms held stiffly at her sides. It was a march, not a stroll. The breeze, which had been so gentle moments before, suddenly felt like a cold wind whipping around me. "Excuse me." Her voice was a low, sharp hiss, devoid of any warmth. It cut through the air like a shard of glass. I stood, a little unsteady, and forced a smile. "Hello, can I help you?" Her eyes, those icy shards, fixed on me. "Are you Amelia Thompson?" "Yes, I am." "I am Karen Sterling, from 3 houses down." She gestured vaguely with a perfectly manicured hand. "I've observed your activities." Leo and Maya had retreated behind my legs, their earlier boisterousness replaced by a wide-eyed silence. I could feel their small hands clutching at my jeans, a silent plea for reassurance. "My activities?" I repeated, my voice a little tighter than I'd intended. "Yes, your disregard for neighborhood aesthetics." She gestured again, this time to the picnic table. "That structure." My brow furrowed. "The picnic table? It's just a table. The children were using it for their fort." Karen's glacial gaze flickered to the children, a fleeting, almost contemptuous glance. Children's play is one thing. The blatant display of dilapidated furniture, however, is another. It is a blight on our community. A wave of incredulity washed over me. A blight? A picnic table? I'd dealt with petty complaints before, but this felt like a different level of obsession. "It's not dilapidated," I said, my voice rising slightly. "It's a perfectly fine table, and it's in my yard." "It is visible from the street," Karen stated, as if delivering a verdict in a courtroom. "And it is an affront to the established standards of our neighborhood. I have driven 20 miles to address this matter directly." 20 miles. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. This wasn't a casual observation. This was a mission. A crusade against a picnic table. "You drove 20 miles?" I asked, my voice laced with disbelief. "To tell me my picnic table is an affront?" "Precisely," she confirmed, her voice unwavering. "I believe in proactive problem-solving, and this situation requires immediate rectification." She took a step closer, her presence radiating an almost palpable aura of self-righteousness. I squared my shoulders, a flicker of defiance igniting within me. This wasn't just about a picnic table anymore. It was about her insidious attempts to control and intimidate, to make me feel unwelcome, inadequate. My children were here, their small bodies pressed against my legs, their innocent faces a silent testament to my right, to enjoy my own home, my own yard, my own life. "Rectification?" I echoed, a slow smile spreading across my face, a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "You mean you want me to put away my picnic table?" "That is the logical and indeed the only acceptable course of action," Karen declared, her voice laced with an almost triumphant finality. "I expect it to be gone by sunset." The sun, now a fiery ember on the horizon, cast a final, defiant glow across the scene. The game was over. The peace was shattered. And the battle for my backyard, and my sanity, had just begun. The black SUV, a menacing silhouette against the molten gold disk of the setting sun, was gone. Karen Sterling had, with a final withering glance that promised further retribution, retreated back to wherever it was she cultivated her brand of neighborhood tyranny. The air, which had moments before crackled with the oppressive energy of her presence, slowly began to breathe again, a collective sigh of relief escaping the very pores of the otherwise tranquil suburban street. But the peace felt fragile, like a thin pane of glass that had been struck once and might shatter completely with another blow. It was the kind of quiet that followed a storm, where the wind still rustled the leaves with an unsettling urgency, and the birds, momentarily silenced by the thunder, began to chirp with a hesitant, almost anxious tone. My children, Leo and Maya, oblivious to the full weight of the confrontation, had resumed their game of chase around the ancient oak, their laughter like wind chimes in the suddenly quiet air, a symphony of pure, unadulterated joy that seemed to push back against the lingering darkness. Yet the echo of Karen's voice, that low, sharp hiss devoid of any warmth, lingered in my ears, a phantom whisper that refused to dissipate. It cut through the pleasant hum of a distant lawnmower, a sound usually indicative of neighborly contentment, and the faint, sweet scent of honeysuckle that usually perfumed these late afternoons, a scent that always evoked memories of lazy summer evenings and the gentle buzz of bees. Karen Sterling. The name itself conjured an image of sharp angles and perfectly coiffed hair, a sentinel at the gates of conformity, a self-appointed guardian of an invisible, yet fiercely enforced, set of unspoken rules. For 6 months, her displeasure had been a spectral detachment, a series of increasingly pointed anonymous notes tucked into my mailbox, each one a tiny paper-thin threat. Then came the emails, digital missives that felt like icy fingers tracing my every perceived transgression, each word a calculated barb designed to prick at my insecurities. My lawn, a little too long after a particularly busy week of juggling work deadlines and school pickups, had been flagged. The colorful, if slightly faded cushions on the patio chairs, a testament to years of outdoor living and countless impromptu gatherings, had been deemed an offense. And now, this? The picnic table. This was no ordinary piece of furniture. It was a relic from my parents' lake house, a sturdy, weather-beaten piece of furniture that had witnessed countless family meals, whispered secrets shared under starlit skies, and the boisterous energy of generations of children. Its surface bore the subtle scars of time, faint rings from forgotten glasses, a deeper groove where a carelessly wielded axe had once struck, and a patina of sun-bleached wood that spoke of years spent basking in the elements. It was a symbol of comfort, of a life lived, not merely maintained. To Karen, however, it was evidently a blight, a dilapidated eyesore that offended her meticulously manicured sensibilities, a glaring imperfection in her otherwise pristine vision of suburban order. 20 miles. She'd driven 20 miles. The sheer effort, the deliberate journey taken with the sole purpose of delivering a decree about my picnic table, was staggering. It spoke of a dedication to her cause that was both absurd and terrifying. It wasn't just about aesthetics, it was about control. Her control. She craved a landscape that mirrored her own internal rigidity, a world where every blade of grass was perfectly trimmed and every object was placed with sterile precision. And the fact that she'd chosen to confront me directly, not through another anonymous missive, meant the gloves were officially off. This was no longer a subtle campaign of passive aggression. It was an open declaration of war. I watched Leo, my pint-sized strategist, meticulously arrange a collection of acorns at the base of the oak, his brow furrowed in concentration, his small hands moving with the deliberate care of a seasoned architect. Maya, a whirlwind of pink and pigtails, was attempting to scale its lowest branch, her small hands gripping the rough bark with determined grit, her eyes shining with the thrill of the challenge. This was my world. This was the messy, imperfect, beautiful reality I was fighting for. A tapestry woven with love, laughter, and the occasional dropped ice cream cone. And Karen Sterling, with her 20-mile drive and her glacial ice eyes, had just declared war on it. A phantom ache settled in my chest, a familiar pang that always surfaced when I thought of Mark and the Saturdays that were now a sacred trust, painstakingly carved out from his custody schedule. These afternoons were my sanctuary, a chance to refill my well, to be present for my children without the constant hum of anxiety that shadowed my weekdays, the gnawing worry that I was always falling short. Karen's intrusion, her uninvited presence, and her venomous pronouncements felt like a violation of that sacred space, a disruption of the carefully balanced ecosystem of my weekend peace. I walked over to the picnic table, running my hand over its worn surface, tracing the contours of its history. The wood was smooth in places, splintered in others, a testament to years of sun, rain, and laughter. Leo and Maya had spent hours here, their small bodies dwarfed by its immensity, drawing with chalk that left vibrant streaks on its surface, building elaborate Lego cities that sprawled across its length, sharing snacks that inevitably ended up on the ground, a testament to their joyful messiness. It was more than just furniture. It was a repository of memories, a silent witness to the unfolding narrative of my children's lives, and Karen wanted it gone by sunset. A surge of something akin to righteous anger began to bubble beneath the surface of my politeness, a slow burn that threatened to ignite. I had endured her passive aggression for months, trying to appease her with subtly tidier displays of my yard, hoping she'd simply tire of her crusade and find a new target for her discontent. But her 20-mile pilgrimage proved that wasn't an option. She wouldn't tire. She would escalate. And I, Amelia, mother of two, owner of a slightly dilapidated picnic table, was not about to be bulldozed into submission by a woman who measured her worth by the conformity of her neighbors. I would not remove the table. Not by sunset, not by next week, not ever. It was my yard, my home, my sanctuary, and Karen Sterling, with her rigid sense of order and her 20-mile drive, was not going to dictate how I lived in it. My home was a reflection of my life, a life that was imperfect and sometimes chaotic, but undeniably rich and full of love. The children, sensing a shift in my demeanor, a subtle hardening of my resolve, gravitated towards me, their usual boisterous energy tempered by an unspoken awareness of the recent tension. Maya, her face flushed with exertion from her tree-climbing endeavors, leaned against my leg, her small hand finding mine. Leo, ever the observer, looked from me to the empty driveway where Karen's imposing SUV had been, his young mind processing the abrupt departure. "Mommy? Is the lady gone?" he asked, his voice a soft murmur, laced with a child's innate sensitivity to adult conflict. I knelt, pulling both my children into a tight hug, their small bodies a comforting weight against mine. "Yes, sweetie. She's gone." "She was mean," Maya declared, her small body trembling slightly, mirroring the residual unease that had settled over the afternoon. "She was," I agreed, stroking Maya's hair, a gesture of reassurance. "But we don't have to let mean people ruin our fun, do we?" Leo nodded solemnly, his gaze steady. "No." "Good," I said, my voice firm, a newfound strength resonating within it. "Because this is our home, and we get to decide what's important here. And this table," I gestured to it, its weathered surface catching the fading light, "is very important to us." The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, casting long shadows that stretched like weary fingers across the lawn, transforming familiar shapes into something more mysterious. The air grew cooler, carrying with it the promise of evening, the chirping of crickets beginning to punctuate the deepening twilight. I knew Karen wouldn't be content with a simple refusal. I could almost feel her calculating, strategizing from her perfectly manicured fortress, already plotting her next move. This was no longer about a picnic table. It was about boundaries. It was about the right to exist, imperfectly and joyfully, without an external force dictating every detail of my life. I stood up, a new resolve hardening my features, a quiet fire igniting within me. I wasn't going to cower. I wasn't going to apologize for living my life, for cherishing a piece of furniture that held so much meaning for my family. I looked at my children, their innocent faces upturned, their trust in me a palpable weight, a responsibility I would not betray. I owed them more than just a peaceful afternoon. I owed them a mother who would stand her ground, a mother who would fight for their right to a childhood unmarred by the petty tyrannies of others. "Okay, guys," I announced, my voice bright and cheerful, a deliberate contrast to the simmering tension beneath the surface, a performance of normalcy designed to reclaim our space. "Who wants to help Mommy set up for a very special impromptu picnic dinner right here at our favorite table?" Leo's eyes lit up, the shadows of the afternoon instantly banished. "Yes!" he exclaimed, his voice filled with renewed enthusiasm. Maya clapped her hands, her earlier unease forgotten. "Picnic!" she squealed, her excitement infectious. I smiled, a genuine smile this time, fueled by defiance and a fierce protectiveness that settled deep in my bones. Let Karen Sterling drive 20 miles. Let her bring her judgment and her impeccable standards and her 20-mile crusade. She had underestimated me. She had underestimated the strength of a mother defending her home, her children, and her right to enjoy a weathered, beloved picnic table under the fading light of a Saturday afternoon. The battle had begun, not with shouts or accusations, but with the quiet, unwavering resolve of a mother claiming her territory and her peace. And I was ready. The air, moments before thick with the sweet perfume of honeysuckle and the innocent chatter of my children, now felt brittle, charged with an unspoken hostility. Karen Sterling's pronouncement hung between us, a silken noose tightening around the fragile piece of my Saturday afternoon. An affront to the established standards. The words, delivered with a peculiar, almost spectral detachment, were so utterly out of proportion to the object of her ire, a perfectly serviceable, albeit slightly sun-bleached, picnic table. My initial instinct, the one honed by years of navigating the choppy waters of co-parenting and the subtle aggressions of those who seem to thrive on conflict, was to placate, to offer a concession, any concession, just to make her go away. But as I looked at her, at the unnervingly smooth expanse of her forehead, the pursed, unsmiling lips, and the eyes that held a chillingly perfunctory assessment of my property, something shifted within me. It wasn't just about a picnic table anymore. It was about the encroachment, the judgment, the sheer, unadulterated nerve of someone driving 20 miles to micromanage my backyard. Leo, bless his pint-sized strategist heart, chose that precise moment to emerge from behind the ancient oak. He clutched a collection of brightly colored building blocks, his brow furrowed in concentration as he tried to balance them on his head. Maya, ever the observer, trailed him, her small hand resting on his back for balance. They were a picture of unadulterated childhood, blissfully unaware of the brewing storm. Karen's gaze, which had been fixed on me with an intensity that felt like a physical weight, flickered to the children. A muscle twitched in her jaw, almost imperceptibly. And this structure, she continued, her voice a low, sharp hiss, devoid of any warmth. It cut through the air like a shard of glass, appears to be actively utilized by the younger members of the household. Which, I must say, only compounds the issue, encouraging such casual disregard for property maintenance. I felt a phantom ache in my chest, a familiar echo of the days when every decision, every perceived imperfection, felt like a personal failing. Mark's subtle criticisms, the thinly veiled disapproval from his more fastidious friends. But those were the ghosts of a past life. This was my sanctuary now, built on the shaky foundations of my own resilience. "It's a picnic table, Karen," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. I took a breath, inhaling the faint, sweet scent of honeysuckle, trying to anchor myself in the familiar comfort of my own space. It's old, yes, but it's perfectly functional. The children use it for their games, for snacks, for reading. It's part of their play. Her lips thinned further. Play is one thing, Amelia. Allowing a dilapidated piece of furniture to become a permanent fixture, a blight on our community's aesthetic, is quite another. The bylaws are quite clear on matters of neighborhood upkeep. I have them here. She patted a sleek, leather-bound folder tucked under her arm. The sound was a dry rustle, like dead leaves skittering across pavement. I could feel the familiar prickle of defensiveness rising, a heat that started in my stomach and spread outward. Bylaws. Neighborhood aesthetics. These were Karen's weapons, wielded with the precision of a surgeon and the conviction of a zealot. She saw herself as a guardian, a sentinel standing against the tide of entropy. I saw her as an intruder, a harbinger of discord. I'm aware of the bylaws, Karen, I replied, keeping my tone measured, though the effort was becoming increasingly taxing. And I'm also aware that this table is on my property. It's not affecting your property. It's not harming anyone. It's a matter of principle, Amelia. A matter of maintaining standards. If this sort of casualness is permitted, where does it end? What next? A trampoline that's seen better days? A garden gnome collection that's deemed too cheerful by some? Her voice was rising, the glacial ice of her composure beginning to crack, revealing a molten core of indignation. Leo, sensing the shift in my demeanor, the subtle tension that had crept into the air, looked up at me, his bright blue eyes wide with a child's intuitive understanding of grown-up unease. Maya, her small face a mask of childish curiosity, was watching Karen with an unnerving stillness. It's just a table, Karen, I repeated, my voice now carrying a steely edge. The phantom ache in my chest had been replaced by a quiet, determined surge of anger. It wasn't the explosive, volatile kind. It was deeper, more resolute. It was the kind that knew what it was fighting for. Just a table, she echoed, as if the words themselves were offensive. That is precisely the kind of thinking that leads to decline, to a degradation of the very fabric of our community. This is not a matter to be taken lightly. I have photographic evidence, of course. She gestured vaguely with the folder. And I have spoken to several other residents who share my concerns. We are prepared to take further action if immediate rectification is not forthcoming. The threat, veiled as it was, landed like a blow. Further action. Photographic evidence. Speaking to other residents. This wasn't a spontaneous outburst. It was a calculated campaign. She had been observing, documenting, planning. The realization sent a shiver down my spine, a cold dread that had nothing to do with the late afternoon sun. My gaze swept over my backyard. The slightly overgrown rose bushes, the worn patch of grass where the children always played soccer, the weathered picnic table. It was imperfect. It was lived in. It was mine. It was the space where Leo and Maya laughed, where they built forts and dreamed up adventures. It was the backdrop to the precious, fleeting moments of their childhood, moments I fought so hard to protect. And Karen Sterling, with her 20-mile drive and her leather-bound folder, had the audacity to call it a blight. The anger, which had been simmering, now boiled over. It was a righteous fury, a protective instinct that surged through me, eclipsing the fear and the unease. I looked at Karen, at her perfectly coiffed hair and her impeccably pressed slacks, and I saw not a neighbor concerned with aesthetics, but a predator, perfectly camouflaged in conformity. "Well, Karen," I said, my voice ringing with a newfound clarity, a defiant resonance that surprised even myself. I met her glacial gaze directly, refusing to flinch. It appears we have a fundamental disagreement on what constitutes a blight and what constitutes a happy childhood. I turned, scooping Maya into my arms. Leo, sensing the shift, abandoned his block tower and scrambled to my side, his small hand finding mine. "Come on, kids," I said, my voice deliberately light, a stark contrast to the tension that still crackled in the air between me and Karen. "It's time for that picnic." I walked purposefully towards the picnic table, the children following close behind. I could feel Karen's eyes boring into my back, a palpable aura of disapproval radiating from where she stood. But I didn't look back. I sat down on the weathered planks, pulling Maya onto my lap. Leo clambered onto the bench beside me, his face alight with anticipation. "Mommy, can we have peanut butter and jelly?" he asked, his voice full of a child's simple joy, a joy that Karen Sterling seemed determined to extinguish. "Absolutely," I replied, my voice firm, laced with a determination that went far beyond sandwiches. I rummaged in the small cooler I'd brought out earlier, pulling out the familiar plastic containers. The faint scent of peanut butter and grape jelly began to mingle with the honeysuckle, a comforting, familiar aroma that was the antithesis of Karen's sterile pronouncements. I spread a checkered blanket on the table, arranging the sandwiches and juice boxes. The sun, a molten gold disk now dipping towards the horizon, cast long shadows that stretched like weary fingers across the lawn. The gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the ancient oak, a soft murmur of approval. Karen Sterling remained standing on the edge of my property, a dark, menacing silhouette against the softening light. I could feel her gaze, a silent, unyielding judgment. But I refused to acknowledge it. I focused on my children, on the sticky fingers that reached for their food, on the happy sighs of contentment. This was my sanctuary, this was my home, and this weathered picnic table, this symbol of simple pleasures and childhood joy, would not be surrendered. The battle, I knew, was only just beginning. But as I watched my children devour their sandwiches, their laughter like wind chimes in the evening air, I felt a surge of conviction. I would fight for this. I would fight for their right to be children. In their own home, at their own table. The 20-mile drive had been a declaration of war. And I, Amelia, was ready to defend my territory. The fight for my home and my sanity had officially begun. The laughter of Leo and Maya, like wind chimes caught in a sudden gust, was Amelia's shield. It bounced off the worn planks of the picnic table, a cheerful, defiant sound against the oppressive silence Karen Sterling had imposed. Karen stood on the edge of the lawn, a sentinel of judgment, her immaculate white linen dress a stark contrast to the comfortable, lived-in sprawl of Amelia's backyard. The setting sun, a molten gold disk sinking below the horizon, cast long shadows that stretched like weary fingers across the grass, but Karen seemed impervious to its softening glow. She was a creature of sharp angles and unwavering lines, her gaze fixed on the picnic table, with a look that Amelia could only describe as a predator's, perfectly camouflaged against a backdrop of manicured perfection. Amelia's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a drumbeat of adrenaline and righteous indignation. She scooped up a handful of popcorn, the kernels still warm from the microwave, and offered them to Maya, who was perched on the edge of the bench, her tiny hands reaching out with eager anticipation. Leo, ever the pint-sized strategist, was meticulously arranging a collection of smooth, gray stones around the base of the table, creating what he declared to be a castle defense system. This wasn't just a picnic, it was a declaration. It was Amelia's way of saying, "This is my home, my space, and my children's joy is not up for debate." Karen took a slow, deliberate step forward, her sensible espadrilles making barely a whisper on the grass. "Mrs. Hayes," she began, her voice a low, sharp hiss, devoid of any warmth. It cut through the air like a shard of glass. I believe we had a clear understanding. Amelia met her gaze, forcing a smile that felt brittle on her lips. We had a disagreement, Mr. Starkling, and I've decided my children's happiness trumps a weathered piece of furniture. She watched Karen's eyes narrow, a flicker of something cold and calculating passing through them. It was the same look Amelia had seen in a nature documentary, the moment a hawk locked onto its prey. Happiness is not a justification for neglecting your responsibilities, Karen retorted, her tone laced with the condescension Amelia had come to loathe. This table, she gestured with a perfectly manicured hand, as if the very word was distasteful, is a blight. It's dilapidated. It's an eyesore. It's a picnic table, Amelia stated, her voice gaining a steely edge. It's seen better days, yes. It's got character. It's where my children have their most cherished memories. It's where we make memories. She emphasized the last word, letting it hang in the air like a challenge. Karen's lips thinned. Memories do not excuse a blatant disregard for neighborhood aesthetics. I have photographic evidence, Mrs. Hayes. Documented proof of its decrepitude. And I have spoken to other residents. Her eyes scanned the yard, a subtle sweep that Amelia knew was assessing every perceived imperfection. The slightly overgrown petunias, the swing set that was a little too faded, the very breath of life that made the yard feel like a home rather than a sterile showroom. They are equally concerned. This is not an isolated issue. Amelia felt a prickle of unease. Karen had been at this for months, a slow, insidious campaign of anonymous notes and veiled complaints about everything from Amelia's gardening choices to the frequency of her children's laughter. But this direct confrontation, this open threat, was a new escalation. It felt personal now, a deliberate attempt to strip away not just a piece of furniture, but Amelia's sense of peace, her very right to exist comfortably in her own space. Concerned about what, exactly? Amelia asked, her voice dangerously calm. That my children are enjoying themselves? That my yard isn't perfectly sterile? Karen's jaw tightened. Concerned about maintaining property values, Mrs. Hayes. Concerned about the overall presentation of our community. This dilapidated furniture is an affront to the established standards. Established by whom? Amelia pushed, leaning forward slightly. By you? Because I seem to recall the HOA guidelines being more about structural integrity and less about the aesthetic appeal of my patio set. And this isn't even part of the HOA, is it? This is just you. Karen's composure wavered for a fraction of a second, a subtle tightening around her eyes. I am merely advocating for the betterment of our shared environment and for proactive problem-solving before this situation deteriorates further. She paused, letting the implication sink in. Which, I might add, would involve immediate rectification. Amelia's gaze swept over her children, their faces alight with pure, unadulterated joy. Leo was now adding tiny flags made from fallen leaves to his stone castle. Maya was happily smearing popcorn butter on her chin, giggling as Amelia wiped it away with a napkin. This was not a situation that needed rectification. It needed to be protected. Immediate rectification, Amelia repeated, the words tasting like ash in her mouth, meaning, I remove the table. She shook her head slowly, a genuine smile finally gracing her lips, though it held no warmth for Karen. No, I don't think I will. Karen blinked, as if Amelia had just spoken in a foreign language. I don't understand, she said, her voice now a tight, controlled tremor. This is logical. It is the only acceptable course of action. Logical for whom? Amelia countered, standing up and walking over to the picnic table. She placed her hand on the aged wood, feeling the familiar grain beneath her palm. It was smooth in places, rough in others, a testament to years of sun, rain, and countless family gatherings. It's logical for you to impose your rigid ideals on everyone else, but for me, for my children, it's not logical at all. It's unnecessary. She looked directly at Karen, her eyes holding a newfound resolve. This table has been here for years. It was here when I bought this house. It's been a backdrop for birthday parties, for lazy Sunday brunches, for my kids learning to draw. It's part of the fabric of this home, and I'm not going to remove it because you deem it dilapidated. Karen's face was a mask of disbelief, then hardening into a chilling resolve. You are being unreasonable, Mrs. Hayes. This is not how this works. I have the evidence. I have the support. I can escalate this. Escalate what? Amelia challenged, her voice ringing with a quiet fury. To whom? The ghost of Mrs. Henderson who used to live here and probably nailed this table together with her own 2 hands? Or do you mean some higher authority that dictates the aesthetic of my backyard? She chuckled, a short, sharp sound. You drove 20 miles to find me for a picnic table. That's not neighborly concern, Miss Sterling. That's obsession. Maya, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, looked up at Amelia with wide, questioning eyes. Leo, his castle complete, stood beside her, a small, determined frown on his face. Amelia knelt beside them, pulling them both into a tight hug. "Mommy?" Maya whispered, her voice laced with apprehension. "It's okay, sweetie," Amelia murmured, stroking Maya's hair. She then looked back at Karen, her gaze unwavering. "I'm not removing the table. This is my home, and my children are happy here. If that offends your sensibilities, then perhaps you're the one who needs to reevaluate your priorities." Karen Sterling stood frozen for a moment, her face a study in controlled fury. The setting sun painted the sky in streaks of orange and purple, a vibrant, messy masterpiece that stood in stark opposition to Karen's carefully curated world. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Amelia knew with absolute certainty that this was not the end of it. Karen's glacial ice eyes promised further action, a chilling certainty that Amelia had poked a bear. But as Karen finally turned, her back a stiff, unyielding line against the softening light, and walked away, her white dress a receding specter on the lawn, Amelia felt a surge of exhilaration. She had stood her ground. She had protected her sanctuary. She looked down at Leo and Maya, their small faces now relaxed, their earlier apprehension replaced by a child's inherent ability to return to the present moment. Leo pointed to the picnic table. "Mommy, can we have s'mores now?" Amelia's smile was genuine, warm, and full of a fierce maternal love. "Absolutely, my love," she said, her voice carrying the sweet scent of honeysuckle and the quiet strength of a woman who had just discovered the power of saying no. She still had the fire going in the grill, a soft plume of smoke rising into the twilight. The picnic table, weathered and worn, stood proudly in the center of her yard, a symbol of defiance, a testament to memory, and the anchor of her family's joy. Karen Sterling might have driven 20 miles to find her, but she had underestimated the lengths Amelia would go to protect what truly mattered. The battle had begun, and Amelia was ready to fight for every inch of her home and every precious memory made within it. The black SUV, a menacing silhouette against the molten gold disk of the setting sun, was gone. Karen Sterling had, with a final withering glance that promised further retribution, retreated back to wherever it was she cultivated her brand of neighborhood tyranny. The air, which had moments before crackled with the oppressive energy of her presence, slowly began to breathe again, a collective sigh of relief escaping the very pores of the otherwise tranquil suburban street. But the peace felt fragile. Like a thin pane of glass that had been struck once, and might shatter completely with another blow. It was the kind of quiet that followed a storm, where the wind still rustled the leaves with an unsettling urgency, and the birds, momentarily silenced by the thunder, began to chirp with a hesitant, almost anxious tone. My children, Leo and Maya, oblivious to the full weight of the confrontation, had resumed their game of chase around the ancient oak, their laughter like wind chimes in the suddenly quiet air, a symphony of pure, unadulterated joy that seemed to push back against the lingering darkness. Yet the echo of Karen's voice, that low, sharp hiss devoid of any warmth, lingered in my ears, a phantom whisper that refused to dissipate. It cut through the pleasant hum of a distant lawnmower, a sound usually indicative of neighborly contentment, and the faint, sweet scent of honeysuckle that usually perfumed these late afternoons, a scent that always evoked memories of lazy summer evenings and the gentle buzz of bees. Karen Sterling. The name itself conjured an image of sharp angles and perfectly coiffed hair, a sentinel at the gates of conformity, a self-appointed guardian of an invisible yet fiercely enforced set of unspoken rules. For 6 months, her displeasure had been a spectral detachment, a series of increasingly pointed anonymous notes tucked into my mailbox, each one a tiny, paper-thin threat. Then came the emails, digital missives that felt like icy fingers tracing my every perceived transgression, each word a calculated barb designed to prick at my insecurities. My lawn, a little too long after a particularly busy week of juggling work deadlines and school pickups, had been flagged. The colorful, if slightly faded cushions on the patio chairs, a testament to years of outdoor living and countless impromptu gatherings, had been deemed an offense. And now, this, the picnic table. This was no ordinary piece of furniture. It was a relic from my parents' lake house, a sturdy, weather-beaten piece of furniture that had witnessed countless family meals, whispered secrets shared under starlit skies, and the boisterous energy of generations of children. Its surface bore the subtle scars of time, faint rings from forgotten glasses, a deeper groove where a carelessly wielded axe had once struck, and a patina of sun-bleached wood that spoke of years spent basking in the elements. It was a symbol of comfort, of a life lived, not merely maintained. To Karen, however, it was evidently a blight, a dilapidated eyesore that offended her meticulously manicured sensibilities, a glaring imperfection in her otherwise pristine vision of suburban order. 20 miles. She'd driven 20 miles. The sheer effort, the deliberate journey taken with the sole purpose of delivering a decree about my picnic table, was staggering. It spoke of a dedication to her cause that was both absurd and terrifying. It wasn't just about aesthetics. It was about control. Her control. She craved a landscape that mirrored her own internal rigidity, a world where every blade of grass was perfectly trimmed and every object was placed with sterile precision. And the fact that she'd chosen to confront me directly, not through another anonymous missive, meant the gloves were officially off. This was no longer a subtle campaign of passive aggression. It was an open declaration of war. I watched Leo, my pint-sized strategist, meticulously